So last year, I did one of my first Tabletop Tavern tips on how to make the edgelord work in your D&D campaign. Now that was a while ago, and that video is pretty old, but I still think it's worth watching. I think it's a great video, but I figured I might make an updated version. But instead of covering the edgelord, I'll cover a topic that's a bit more broad, and something that a lot of people say you shouldn't play in D&D ever. A lot of people play edgelords, but one thing that a lot of people advise you certainly don't play is a lone wolf. And I can't say I disagree. Lone wolves will often result in a character who doesn't interact with the rest of the party, or is even a bit dickish to the rest of the party, which is not exactly great. I'm not trying to create a character that never talks to anyone, but a character who may be a little bit more socially awkward, a character who is a bit less talkative, a character on the edgier side. I think that we can absolutely make that work. We can create something like Batman from the Justice League Unlimited animated show, or Geralt of Rivia from The Witcher. These are lone wolf characters, but they're still fun and interesting and interact well with other characters. Basically something that you would absolutely want in a Dungeons & Dragons game. So, today, I have made my own lone wolf character following the guidelines and tips in this video. I'm going to introduce you to her, and then we are going to get started by talking about the guidelines I use to make her interesting for my games. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so a bit of backstory here. This character started as an NPC in my Descent into the Veil campaign, covered in the Campaign Diary podcast, which you can check out in the cards if I remember. And while I never had any intention of making her a player character, I got some art done of her by a fan, and he did such an excellent job that I decided to flesh her out into a full-on character. And she absolutely follows this socially awkward lone wolf character trope. So, without further ado, I suppose we should roll the dramatic backstory and introduce you to Caroline, the Changeling Rogue. Caroline spends most of her time just trying her best. Trying her best to hold down a stable job, finding her best to put food on her own table, trying her best to remember her past. At first glance, it's easy to assume that Caroline must have had some tragic history scarring her since birth. But the honest truth is, Caroline can't remember her history. Or much, for that matter. She has a serious problem with remembering things. She also has a serious problem with people. Talking to them is difficult. She gets nervous really easily. She's not trying to be brooding or rude, she just finds it incredibly stressful to be in social situations. Her talent with psionics does not make that any easier. Hell, even when people aren't talking, she still manages to hear tons of voices. She doesn't understand people. She loves stars, though. The night sky has always fascinated her. She may not remember much, but she remembers every star pattern, every chart, every moon phase. On nights when it's hard to sleep, the beauty of the night sky brings her a lot of comfort. But recently, Caroline has decided to make a change in her life. She's tired of just sitting in the corner waiting for something to happen, waiting for somebody to reveal what she is, who she is. She's sick of it, and so she's going to put her talents as a rogue to good use at last. Psionics are great for reading minds and moving things with your mind, but psionic blades are really great for making sure that her enemies aren't moving at all. Caroline tries her best, and now she'll try her best to make sure that her friends are staying alive. Caroline is the Soul Knife Rogue subclass. I had a lot of fun making her, and as you can see, she takes a bit more of a comedic approach to the lone wolf character trope. A lot of lone wolves are lone wolves because of something traumatic, or something incredibly dark and gloomy. But I also think that a lone wolf doesn't have to be a lone wolf just because of trauma. They could also just have anxiety or something along those lines and still follow the same character trope. Now, let's go over some things that make Caroline different from a lot of the edgelords that we see in RPG horror stories. Number one thing, and the first tip we've got under our sleeves: just because your character isn't talkative doesn't mean they don't need to talk at all. I think that this is really important. When you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, a lot of the game is going to be the interactions that you have with the other players. And that means that if you play a character who never speaks to anyone, never engages in role-playing, that makes your character, I'm gonna be honest here, kind of boring. A lone wolf should be interesting in some way, and that means that they need to talk at least sometimes. Just because you don't talk a lot doesn't mean you don't interact with the party ever. It just means that maybe you choose your words more carefully or only speak when you absolutely need to. Yasha in Critical Role Campaign 2 was very much like this. Her words were chosen very meaningfully, very purposefully. She only spoke when she had to, and while she didn't talk a lot, she still did talk to the other players, and that made her an interesting character. If Yasha was 100% silent all the time, that would be bad. In fact, I would say that the moments where Yasha was the most boring character was when Ashley was not present and Matt had to kind of just improv what he was going to do with the character. He didn't do much because he didn't want to take control of another person's character, probably a good thing by the way, but that resulted in Yasha not saying much, if anything at all, and that's exactly what you want to avoid when you're making a lone wolf character. Take Batman from the Justice League Unlimited animated show. A lot of people use Batman as the quintessential lone wolf, but Batman is exactly what a lone wolf should be, not shouldn't be. Batman talks to the other Justice League members. His interactions with Superman and Wonder Woman and other characters in that show are some of my favorites in the entire DC Universe franchise. I absolutely love Batman's interactions with the Justice League. It's honestly sometimes even kind of funny seeing him interact with less serious characters. He balances off of them really well, and that illustrates that while lone wolves shouldn't be like super talkative, it does sort of defeat the purpose of the character trope, that doesn't mean they can't talk ever. Engaging with the other party members and using your character's unique personality as a way to create interesting roleplay, that should be the point of your character. You shouldn't be 100% silent, because then your character just becomes boring and a bit of a stone wall. It is really important for your character to have a compelling reason that they don't talk much. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it has to be there. Caroline is as simple as it gets. She has anxiety, therefore she doesn't talk a lot. She has trouble interacting with other people. She tries her best, but sometimes her best isn't enough to hold down a full, stable conversation. She gets nervous, she gets scared. It makes her, 1, relatable, and 2, makes her reasonable to the rest of the party. They understand why she doesn't talk much, and that makes her a little bit more interesting. If she just was brooding in the corner, never saying anything without any reason, the party, well, they wouldn't really hook on to her character as well. It's harder to roleplay with somebody that you know nothing about, with no reason that they act the way that they act. I know that this tip can sound like I'm trying to say that your character can't be mean ever, and I definitely don't believe that. I love snarky characters. I've noticed that a lot of first-time players make snarky characters, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I actually think snarky is a personality that fits perfectly into the lone wolf character trope. Han Solo, for example. I mean, Solo is literally in the name, and while Chewbacca is his very good friend, he spends a lot of A New Hope being a snarky lone wolf character, only really interacting with Chewbacca and just kind of getting mad at everybody else. And it makes his character pretty fun. However, if Han Solo is in a D&D game, it is important that Han Solo's player doesn't legitimately anger the rest of the party members. Don't use your lone wolf personality to be legitimately mean to other people because it's what your character would do. I've discussed it's what my character would do extensively in other videos, but it boils down to this. There's nothing wrong with doing what your character would do. But there is something wrong if it ruins the fun for other players. And just because your character is a lone wolf doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be mean in the game. Also, if you want an in-universe reason, your character needs a reason to stick with this party. What reason do they have to keep your character around if all they do is be rude and mean and instigatory? If you want an example of a lone wolf gone wrong, trust me, Crit has so many RPG horror story edgelord videos about that rogue who sits in the corner, broods all the time, never engages with the rest of the party, just generally acts like a jerk, murder hobos his way through the campaign, and then gets promptly kicked out. Just because your character is a lone wolf doesn't mean they need to act like that. And while I don't think most of you will act in that extreme of a way, a lot of people do accidentally fall into that trope. My character's a loner, that means they should be snarky or rude, right? Well, not necessarily. Characters don't need to be mean. Lone wolves can be friendly outside of their tough exterior or nervous exterior, depending on what kind of character you're playing. Just make sure that your party enjoy having this character around. This tip kind of goes for all characters, NPCs, player characters, doesn't really matter, but it especially applies to lone wolves. They need to be interesting. Your character isn't talkative. You're not going to be talking as much as the party face, for example, so you need some sort of interesting quirks or traits that make your character stand out and make them memorable. Make your fellow party members care about them. Caroline, for example, likes stargazing. She likes looking up at the sky, drawing the star patterns, drawing planetary alignments, drawing moon phases. It's a character quirk that makes her stand out from the crowd, that makes her different from the random NPC mercenaries that the party meet. If she was just a silent, brooding character who had no interesting traits about her, the party have no reason to care. Because your character isn't going to talk much, it can make it difficult for the party to hook onto them. So you need these traits and quirks to make them a little bit more interesting. If your party see that your character has an interesting trait, like obsessively sharpening their sword almost 24/7, or a character who has just a strong distaste of anything to do with water, then they have a reason to investigate further, to talk to you more, and to engage with this person. With lone wolf characters who don't talk much, actions are really, really important. And as the classic saying goes, actions can absolutely speak louder than words. Your character might even be more interesting because they don't talk about their backstory much, and might incentivize your fellow players to investigate further and to engage. That is the goal here. Just because your character isn't super talkative doesn't mean your players can't engage with them. And I think that that's super, super important. While you don't need to go completely out of this world with the traits that your character embodies, you do need to have something interesting there to keep your party engaged. Alright, final tip, and this one is super important. The end goal of a lone wolf is not to stay alone. A lot of people miss that lone wolf characters, their character arc is opening up. For example, look no further than the Mandalorian show, where the Mandalorian, the main character, his whole arc is opening up to Baby Yoda, or Grogu, the child that he carries around throughout the entire show. That's his entire arc. Him making friends with other mercenaries and bounty hunters, talking with other people. He starts the show alone, but slowly builds up relationships with other characters throughout the show. And I love that about Mando. And that is a great example of what the end goal of your lone wolf character should probably be. You have a party, you have a group that your character is traveling with. Over the course of the campaign, it can be really satisfying to watch your character interact more with the rest of the party. Seeing them open up and talk more with the rest of the party is something that will definitely act as really interesting roleplay and story building for your campaign. There's nothing better than seeing the guy who didn't talk much at the beginning start to open up more with his fellow party members, start to become more secure in their friendship. And you know, that is something that I love in Dungeons and Dragons. I've said this so many times, but the found family aspects of D&D are some of my favorite parts of this game, and seeing lone wolf characters open up to their fellow party members, I mean, it's just really compelling storytelling to me. I think it's a shame that so many lone wolf characters try to stay that way throughout the campaign, because I think the best part of having a character like this is the growth that comes with it. Opening up with their new friends, with their allies, with the people that they fight and sometimes even die alongside. I love that. And I think it makes for some of the most compelling character arcs that you can portray in a D&D campaign. And that is all the advice that I have for you. In summary, I think while lone wolves can be hard to pull off, I think they can absolutely work in your Dungeons & Dragons games. Just don't make them a stone wall. Don't make them hollow. Don't make them a jerk who no one wants to talk to. Make them interesting. Make them engaging for your fellow party members. Make them a part of the team. That is so, so important. We use Batman so often as an example, but Batman was part of a team. He's a main member of the Justice League, one of the most famous teams ever. So I don't see why your lone wolf can't be a welcome member of your party as well. They can be interesting, they can be engaging, and I think they can absolutely be a welcome addition for your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. If you guys enjoyed this episode of Tabletop Tavern Tips, you want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out my 100 plus episode RPG horror story series, where we talk about the best of the worst of Dungeons and Dragons. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment Lone Wolf to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.